Sophie Bennett tightened her grip on the steering wheel as she approached the towering iron gates of Hale Manor. The sprawling estate was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a world apart from the modest apartment she shared with her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. The job offer had been a miracle. Personal assistant to Nathan Hale, the elusive founder of Hale Technologies. The salary promised a stability Sophie had only dreamed of, but there was more. Along with the job came the chance for Sophie and Lily to live at Hale Manor, a place that promised safety, comfort, and a fresh start. "Remember," Sophie whispered to herself, echoing the words of Mrs. Mabel, Hale Manor's formidable housekeeper. Structure and discretion, always. The gravel driveway seemed endless as it wound through meticulously kept gardens before revealing the grand mansion, its stone facade imposing yet beautiful. Sophie straightened her simple blouse and blazer, the best she could afford for her new role, and exhaled deeply. Before she could knock, the door swung open. There stood Mrs. Mabel, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her gaze sharp. "You're 3 minutes early, Miss Bennett," she noted with a curt nod. "Good. Mr. Hale values punctuality. You and your daughter will be shown to your quarters after the initial briefing. Follow me." Sophie stepped inside, her heels clicking on the marble floor. She caught glimpses of chandeliers and oil paintings as she hurried to keep up with Mrs. Mabel's brisk pace. Uncertainty gnawed at her. This was a world of wealth and precision, a stark contrast to her own. Yet, as she thought of Lily's bright smile and the new opportunities this job could offer her daughter, Sophie knew she had to make it work. Sophie had barely finished unpacking when Mrs. Mabel led her down a long hallway toward a cozy, sunlit wing of the house. "These will be your quarters," Mrs. Mabel said, opening the door to reveal a spacious suite with 2 bedrooms, a small sitting area, and a private bathroom. Sophie's breath caught. The room was bigger than their entire apartment. The sitting area already had a small table with crayons and coloring books, and one of the bedrooms was painted in soft pastel colors, clearly designed with Lily in mind. "Mr. Hale thought your daughter might appreciate it," Mrs. Mabel said, her stern expression softening slightly. Lily ran into the room, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, look, it's like a princess room." She twirled around before running to the bed, where a stuffed dragon toy was waiting for her. Sophie blinked back tears. "It's perfect." That first night at Hale Manor, Sophie tucked Lily into bed in her new room. "Do you like it here, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Lily nodded, clutching the dragon toy. "It's the best place ever. Can we stay here forever, Mom?" Sophie kissed her daughter's forehead. "As long as we can, my love." And for the first time in years, Sophie felt a sense of stability. Sophie adjusted quickly, or at least she tried to. Hale Manor was a place of unspoken rules and precision, a world so different from her modest life. Each morning began at exactly 7 a.m. with the soft chime of the manor's antique clock. Sophie would prepare schedules, handle Nathan's correspondence, and oversee the small staff who maintained the estate. Mrs. Mabel watched her every move with a critical eye, her sharp corrections constant but never unkind. "Discretion, Miss Bennett," she would remind whenever Sophie's curiosity lingered too long on Nathan's private life or the forbidden West Wing. For Lily, however, the manor was a wonderland. The gardens became her enchanted forest, and the vast library a treasure trove of magical tales. One afternoon, Sophie found Lily sitting cross-legged on the grand carpet, clutching a thick book about castles. "This is where knights and dragons lived, Mom," Lily declared, her eyes wide with wonder. Sophie smiled despite her exhaustion. "Dragons, huh? Just don't let them bother Mr. Hale. Remember his work hours." But it seemed Nathan didn't mind. Occasionally, Sophie caught him pausing on his way to a meeting, watching Lily from the doorway of the library, his expression softening in a way that surprised her. Over time, Sophie noticed subtle changes. Nathan's cold demeanor thawed slightly whenever Lily was around. He even asked Sophie questions about her daughter, something she never expected. Despite the long hours and the constant pressure, Sophie began to feel a strange sense of belonging at Hale Manor. Watching Lily thrive gave her hope that maybe, just maybe, this new life could work. It started on a Wednesday afternoon. Sophie was in the kitchen preparing tea for Nathan's late meeting when she noticed Lily sitting unusually quiet at the counter. Her daughter's bubbly energy had been replaced with a troubled look, her small hands nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Sophie asked, setting the tray aside. Lily hesitated, then said in a soft voice, "There was a man at school today. He said he was my dad." Sophie's heart sank. "What else did he say?" "That he's coming to take me home." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to go, Mom. I like it here." Sophie's hands trembled as she hugged her daughter tightly. James. She hadn't heard from him in over 5 years, not since he'd walked out on them with little more than a promise to sort himself out. Later that evening, as Sophie tucked Lily into bed, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Nathan standing there, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Mabel informed me about the man at Lily's school," he said. "Do you need help?" Sophie hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. "He's her father. I don't know what rights he has or what he wants, but I can't let him disrupt Lily's life." Nathan's gaze softened. "You're not alone in this. We'll handle it together." The next morning, James showed up at Hale Manor unannounced. He looked older, but his cocky grin was the same. "Nice place, Sophie. Looks like you've done well for yourself." "Why are you here, James?" Sophie asked, her voice cold. "I want to see my daughter," he replied, his tone defiant. "She's not your daughter when it's convenient for you," Sophie shot back. "You left us, remember?" James stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You can't keep her from me. I'll get the courts involved if I have to." Nathan appeared in the doorway, his presence commanding. "Mr. Carter, I suggest you leave before this becomes a legal matter." James sneered. "And who are you? The knight in shining armor?" "No," Nathan replied coolly. "I'm the man who won't let you hurt them." As security escorted James off the property, Sophie's relief was short-lived. She knew this wasn't the end. James wasn't the type to give up, and the looming threat of a custody battle hung over her like a storm cloud. That night, as Sophie lay awake listening to Lily's steady breathing, she realized she would do whatever it took to protect her daughter, even if it meant confronting the demons of her past. The tension in Hale Manor was palpable. James's sudden return cast a shadow over Sophie's every thought, and Nathan seemed to sense it. He didn't push her to talk, but his quiet presence became an anchor. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Nathan found Sophie in the library, staring at a pile of books, but clearly lost in thought. "You've been working late," he said softly, breaking the silence. Sophie gave a weak smile. "I couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." Nathan hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from her. "Sometimes distractions help. Tell me, what does Lily love most about this place?" Sophie's face softened. "The gardens, definitely. She says it's like stepping into a fairy tale." Nathan chuckled. "She's not wrong. My son used to say the same thing about the West Wing." The mention of his son caught Sophie off guard. She'd always avoided asking about the West Wing, respecting the rules, but now she couldn't stop herself. "You never talk about him." Nathan's gaze turned distant, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. "His name was Ethan. He was 7, just like Lily. He and my wife, they died in a car accident. She was driving him to a piano recital." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Sophie reached out, resting her hand over his. "You're not alone anymore." Nathan looked up, his steel blue eyes meeting hers. "Neither are you." They sat in the library for a moment longer, the weight of his loss and her struggles melding into a fragile but growing bond. For the first time, Sophie felt that Nathan's stoic walls might finally be coming down. The quiet was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Mabel entered, her expression grave. "Miss Bennett, there's a letter for you. It's from Mr. Carter's lawyer." In that moment, something shifted. The barriers they'd carefully maintained began to crumble, replaced by a connection neither could deny. But the moment was fleeting. A knock at the door shattered the quiet intimacy. Mrs. Mabel entered, her expression grave. "Miss Bennett, there's a letter for you. It's from Mr. Carter's lawyer." Sophie's stomach sank as she took the envelope, her hands trembling. Nathan's steady voice broke through her rising panic. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it, together." The letter from James's lawyer was only the beginning. It outlined his intent to seek joint custody of Lily, citing his reformed lifestyle and rightful place as her father. Sophie spent days racked with anxiety, but it was Nathan's quiet strength that kept her grounded. "He's bluffing," Nathan assured her one evening. "His record, his years of absence, it's all against him. We'll fight this." But Sophie knew James too well. When she arrived home one evening to find Lily upset, clutching her dragon toy tightly, Sophie's worst fears were confirmed. "He came to school again," Lily said in a trembling voice. "He told me he'd take me to see his house and that you wouldn't mind." Sophie felt her heart pound as she hugged Lily tightly. "You don't have to worry, sweetheart. He won't take you anywhere." Nathan didn't hesitate to take action. That night, extra security was hired for Hale Manor, and a formal restraining order was filed against James. Still, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that James wasn't done yet. Her fears came true one stormy evening. Sophie was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the fire alarms blared through the house. Smoke filled the air as the staff scrambled to find the source. "The West Wing!" a security guard shouted. Sophie ran toward the chaos, panic gripping her. When she reached the West Wing, flames were licking the walls, consuming the relics of Nathan's past, photos, keepsakes, and memories. And there was James, standing amidst the destruction, a twisted grin on his face. "You think you can just replace me?" he spat. "Build a new family without me?" Sophie's anger overpowered her fear. "This isn't about you, James. It's about Lily. She deserves better than you ever gave her." Nathan appeared behind her, his voice cold as steel. "Get out of my house, Carter, now." James lunged forward, but the security guards subdued him before he could get close. Police arrived moments later to arrest him, but not before he shouted one last threat. "This isn't over, Sophie. You'll regret this." As James was led away, Sophie turned to find Nathan staring at the charred remains of the West Wing. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the loss. "I'm so sorry," Sophie whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is my fault. He was trying to hurt me, and now—" Nathan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "None of this is your fault. And maybe it's time to let go of the past." The fire had destroyed much of what Nathan had preserved for years, but as he stood there with Sophie and Lily, he realized that not everything had been lost. "Are you okay, Mom?" Lily's small voice broke through the silence. Sophie knelt down, hugging her tightly. "I am now. We're safe, Lily. That's all that matters." And for the first time in years, Sophie believed it. Weeks after the fire, Hale Manor was finally returning to a sense of normalcy. The charred remains of the West Wing had been cleared, leaving a blank slate, a symbol of moving forward. Sophie stood in what had once been the heart of Nathan's memories. Now, it was being transformed into something new, a vibrant art studio filled with light, laughter, and Lily's endless imagination. Her daughter's drawings covered the walls, from colorful dragons to magical castles. "Mom, look," Lily called, holding up a picture of a dragon flying over Hale Manor. "It's guarding the house now." Sophie smiled, her heart full. "I think it's doing a great job." Behind her, Nathan's familiar voice added, "I'd say so. Best security system we've ever had." Sophie turned to see Nathan leaning against the doorframe, his tie loosened, a rare softness in his expression. In his hands was a small photo frame. "I thought this might belong here," he said, holding it out to her. It was a picture of his late wife and son. The edges were slightly burned, but the image was still intact. Sophie took it carefully, tears stinging her eyes. "We'll make this a room for all of us," Nathan said gently. "Not just the past, but the present and the future." Sophie placed the photo on a new shelf, beside one of Lily's crayon masterpieces. "Perfect," she whispered. The next month, the house was abuzz with preparations. Guests would be arriving soon, not for a business meeting or charity gala, but for a wedding. As Sophie stood in her room, adjusting the simple yet elegant white dress Rosa had insisted she wear, Lily burst in, holding a small pillow adorned with a dragon design. "Mom, I'm ready. The dragons are too," Lily beamed, her joy infectious. Sophie laughed, pulling her daughter close. "You're going to be the best ring bearer ever." Downstairs, Nathan waited at the foot of the grand staircase, his usual composed demeanor replaced with something softer: hope, love, and quiet determination. When Sophie descended, their eyes met, and in that moment, all the trials, fears, and uncertainties faded away. "You look beautiful," Nathan said, his voice filled with emotion. "And you look nervous," Sophie teased, though her own voice wavered. Nathan smiled. "Only because I can't believe I get to marry you." The ceremony was simple yet perfect. Surrounded by friends, staff who had become family, and the echoes of the past, Sophie and Nathan made their promises. When it was over, Lily threw her arms around them both, declaring, "Now we're a real family." "Yes," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking with joy. "We are." As the sun set over Hale Manor, the family stood together in the garden. The laughter of guests mingled with the sound of Lily's dragon impressions, filling the air with a sense of renewal. Nathan took Sophie's hand, his gaze steady. No more looking back, just forward. "Forward," Sophie agreed, squeezing his hand. Together they stepped into their future, ready to face whatever came next, not alone, but as a family. In the months that followed, life at Hale Manor settled into a new rhythm. The once quiet mansion now buzzed with activity and warmth. Mornings started with breakfast together in the sunlit dining room. Nathan, who had once been consumed by work, made it a point to sit with Sophie and Lily, discussing plans for the day or laughing over Lily's imaginative stories. One morning, Lily proudly displayed her latest drawing at the table, a family portrait of dragons. "This one's you, Dad," she said, pointing to a dragon wearing glasses. Nathan laughed. "Do I look that serious?" "Only when you're working," Lily teased, and Sophie couldn't help but join in the laughter. Afternoons were filled with family projects. They planted a garden in the backyard, with Lily assigning roles to everyone. "Mom, you're in charge of flowers. Dad, you're on dragon statues. I'll handle the fairy lights." Evenings were Sophie's favorite. They'd gather in the library where Nathan read aloud from Lily's favorite books. His voice, deep and calming, brought the stories to life in a way that made Lily's eyes light up. One rainy Saturday, Sophie found Nathan and Lily in the art studio, painting side by side. Nathan, usually so composed, had a streak of bright green paint across his cheek as he tried to follow Lily's instructions. "You're making the dragon too small," Lily complained. "It's a baby dragon," Nathan explained, grinning as Sophie entered. She laughed, grabbing a brush to join them. "Let me show you how it's done." By the end of the day, the three of them were covered in paint, but the masterpiece, a mural of dragons and castles, was proudly displayed on the studio wall. As spring turned into summer, Hale Manor became a hub for family gatherings and joy. Rose's family often visited, filling the halls with laughter and delicious cooking. Even Mrs. Mabel, though still stern, had softened, often sharing tea with Sophie while watching Lily play in the garden. One evening, Nathan took Sophie's hand as they watched Lily chase fireflies under the twilight sky. "Do you think she knows how much she's changed my life?" Nathan asked, his voice filled with emotion. "She's a remarkable kid," Sophie said, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you're a remarkable man." He turned to her, his gaze filled with love. "None of this would have been possible without you, Sophie. You gave me a second chance at family." "And you gave us a home," Sophie replied, her heart full. As Lily ran toward them, her laughter filling the air, Sophie and Nathan embraced her. A family bound not by blood, but by love and choice. Sophie felt the weight of the past finally lift, replaced by the warmth of the present. For the first time, she believed in a future where joy wasn't fleeting but permanent, a life where love and laughter could truly last. Together, they faced the future, knowing they'd found something precious, a life of happiness, filled with dragons, laughter, and endless possibilities.